Today we're going to take a look at some of the variations in sexuality that occur. The first variation we're going to take a look at is androgen insensitivity syndrome, or AIS for short. This is marked by XY chromosomes, so the person with this syndrome would be considered genetically male. However, they have a female appearance. They appear female at birth and are raised as little girls, and they even appear female at puberty when they develop breasts. However, they don't menstruate. What occurs is that there are no functioning androgen receptors. Either there are no androgen receptors at all, or the ones that are there simply don't function. So while testosterone is present, it cannot exert its masculinizing effects. Anti-Mullerian hormone is still present, and it does defeminize the internal structures. So the person is born without a uterus or ovaries. The person with AIS has a female gender identity and is almost always heterosexual. The next variation we'll take a look at is persistent Mullerian duct syndrome. And this is caused by one of two things, either a failure to produce anti-Mullerian hormone or an absence of receptors for anti-Mullerian hormone. In XY, or genetic males, the androgens are present and will do their job to masculinize parts of the brain and the body. However, the anti-Mullerian hormone is absent, so it doesn't defeminize. So what happens is you end up with a person with both sex organs present. What this results in is that the person is usually not fertile. Our next variation is Turner syndrome. Here, there is only one sex chromosome present, so they are known as an XO, and the X is typically from the mother. There are no ovaries, as you need to have two X chromosomes for proper ovary development. There are female sex organs present, and there's a female appearance, and a female gender identity. And in fact, the identity is often hyperfeminism. Turner syndrome girls tend to really like female activities. They like quiet time, they like to read, they like to do housework, and they typically avoid masculine activities. They don't typically like sports or rough and tumble play. And this would make sense given that they have a predominance of the female hormone and in fact lack testosterone. Next, we have congenital adrenal hyperplasia, or CAH. This occurs when there is exposure to increased androgens in utero. In XY boys, or genetic males, they develop normally. They just get a little extra hit of androgens such as testosterone. The issue occurs in XX girls. They are often born with an enlarged clitoris, the labia can sometimes be fused, and the androgens that they are exposed to appear to masculinize the brain as well as some parts of the body. One component part of the brain that may be affected is the part that helps to determine our sexual orientation. We see that about 33% of CAH girls report being bisexual or homosexual, which is a far higher number than what we find in the typical normal non-CAH population. They choose to play with boys' toys more often, and they may behave more like tomboys. So what we're seeing is that this increased exposure to androgens may affect not only their bodies, but their brains, as well as their preferences. Another variation is 5-alpha reductase deficiency, or sometimes what's referred to as guevadoches. It occurs in XY, or genetic males, who are female in appearance at birth, and their genitals appear female, and they're often initially raised as girls because they look like little girls. The male gonads are present because the anti-Mullerian hormone defeminizes the body. However, they can't efficiently convert testosterone into dihydrotestosterone, and that's where the 5-alpha reductase deficiency exerts its effects. And so early on, they're not able to turn testosterone into the more powerful dihydrotestosterone, and so some of the masculinizing effects don't take effect. They're not seen. However, at puberty, because there's such a huge burst of testosterone, there's often enough present to cause the testes to descend and masculinize the body. And that's where we get the term guevadoches, that it means basically getting your testes at age 12, which would be around puberty. Typically these males have male gender identity even early on, and so they're choosing to play with other boys and to play with boys' toys. We see this particular disorder, this 5-alpha reductase deficiency, occurring in a small population in the Dominican Republic. So it's been researched quite extensively in that particular community. The last variation that we'll take a look at is Klinefelter syndrome, and it is marked by having an extra X chromosome. So you see an XXY chromosomal pattern. Usually we see a male gender identity, and we usually identify these people as being genetically male because of the presence of the Y chromosome. However, we see decreased testicular function. It is marked by lower testosterone function, or what is sometimes referred to as hypogonadism. There's a decreased fertility, and in fact there's often very few viable sperm. In terms of their appearance, there's often a lower muscle mass than in your typical XY males, and there can be increased breast tissue, which is referred to as gynecomastia. So hopefully what you've seen by looking at these variations is that there's a lot more variations than just males and females. And you might have just simply thought that all females are XX and have estrogen and low testosterone, and all males are XY. And hopefully what this allows you to see is that there's a number of variations, that sometimes our chromosomes and our hormones and our bodies and our brains don't match up perfectly. And it turns out that hormones can exert their effects in a number of different ways. They can exert their effects at one time to affect our bodies, at another time to affect our brains, and in that affecting of the brain, it can actually exert itself at different times to control our gender identity, potentially our sexual identity, and as well as the behaviors that we engage in.